We're going to get started here in about another minute. As we're waiting, if you could please fill out this polling question on how has teleworking impacted your organization? Has it been successful? Has it been challenging? Have you been able to get over some of those hurdles? If you're unsure, go and click that. And with these polling questions, we're going to have a few during the presentation. So it'll be a good practice for you before we get started. And as we're waiting, we have one more minute here before we get started. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dan Murphy, and I'm the Program Manager for Georgia Community Options, and I'll be moderating today's webinar session. We had you fill out this original telework question, and it looks like for a lot of folks here that teleworking has initially been successful. For other organizations or for other people, it has been challenging, but a lot of folks are getting over the hurdles, so that's really great to see. If you have not attended any previous webinar sessions, or if you're new to GCO, just know that Georgia Community Options offers a suite of services that are available at no cost to help commuters and employers make the switch from driving alone as part of a regional strategy to reduce traffic and improve air quality. Before I introduce today's presenters, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping notes. First, for the sake of the presenters, we have muted all participants for the duration of the presentation. This webinar is recording and will be sent out in a follow-up email. Next, I'd like to call out the Q&A feature here on Zoom. If you have a question you'd like us to answer, please just drop them in there. And there's also a chat feature that we'll be moderating as well. For today's presentation on embracing cultural change, we have Elham Shirazi, GCO's Telework Specialist on staff, and Kevin Smith, the Chief Operating Officer for the Georgia Baptist Mission Board. Elham has over 30 years of experience in developing telework and flexible scheduling programs and is recognized as a leader in this field. She has developed resource materials, conducted training workshops, worked with hundreds of employers, and evaluated the impacts of telework and flexible scheduling for organizations across the country and for many here in the Metro Atlanta region. Kevin has been with the Georgia Baptist Mission Board for over 15 years and has been working with GCO since 2018. By making full use of GCO services and resources, including surveys, focus groups, consulting, and adopting telework policies, his organization has been able to successfully navigate through this current pandemic. During today's presentation, Elham will be sharing a lot of great data and insights from organizations we've been working with the past couple of months. But I thought it would also be helpful for folks who are attending to see each other's experiences on how your organization has responded to challenges with teleworking so far. So if we could go ahead and pull up the next question here. On what have been your organization's challenges with teleworking? You can click more than one option for this question, including none, equipment, technology, collaboration, employees, balancing home and work life, as well as burnout and isolation. So we'll give it a little bit for folks to fill out this answer. Okay, if we go and pull up the responses. So it looks like the major response was employees balancing the work and home schedule and life, which I have myself just a dog, but for folks who have pets and children, I'm sure it's been very difficult. But it looks like we have kind of an arrangement of responses here, which is helpful for us to know. So with that, I will hand it over to you, Elham, to hopefully address a lot of these issues.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay, great. Sorry, I don't know why I got muted there for a second. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon as we try to learn a little bit about what has happened in the past, 4 to 6 weeks. And we know that these have been challenging times, difficult times for a lot, and a lot of people are teleworking. So let's learn from, some of the impacts and try to get to a better place within our organizations so that business can continue. Okay. What we have been seeing in the past, 4 to 6 weeks has been something called extreme teleworking. When we would be promoting teleworking prior to COVID-19, it was really a different setup. The ideal telework situation would be one where, the employee would probably be home alone, or, definitely in a separate room and away from distractions. There would be childcare in place, there would be school, and if you have a partner or a spouse, they would probably be doing their job at their organization, and not everything was under the same roof. So what we're looking at in today's environment is something that, for lack of a better word yet, we're calling extreme teleworking, where all household members have to operate together, share the broadband. There's parents who are homeschooling, working, providing childcare. People are certainly cooking and baking and being really stressed out by the pandemic. I'm going to share some data points to, shed some light on what we're seeing happen in the marketplace. So this is a survey. I have various survey results that I want to share with you. These results are off of a survey that had close to 6,000 respondents conducted by CNBC in 6 swing states. And it was conducted mid-April. And I think what this survey very importantly shows is that about 40% of the population are working at home, but 60% aren't. So let's not forget about that 60%. However, when we look at the 40% that are working at home, a small percentage, about 9% had worked at home before. 14% are teleworking a lot more than ever before, because some of them had only done it on an ad hoc basis. And about half of them are completely new to this. So, they got into this cold as opposed to, others who might have had some training. Another question, and this survey was conducted by SHRM on April 6th, so it's all very new data, Society for Human Resource Management. One of the questions that they asked people was, who else are you co-working with? And yes, people do call their pets their co-workers. And as you can see, obviously multiple answers were allowed. And, the most popular was pets and significant others. 41% are working with children at home, which can cause a lot of distraction. Only 14% are alone. And again, with those who are alone, it might be easier to work, but then there's the isolation factor and the burnout factor that we have to watch out for. Now, this SHRM survey also asked of the respondents, how many times in the day were they interrupted by others in the household? And as you can see, the majority, or 66%, said that they were interrupted between 0 to 5 times. And some people are showing a lot more interruption, and that's about, when you look at these two columns, rows together, it's about 33%. So obviously the home has gotten to be a very, very busy place. When they asked, do you show your face on video conference calls? I guess video conferencing has become really, the new trend and fashionable. And of course we miss each other. So 70% are, and about 30% are not. But we'll talk about this too. Some people are saying that they have a bit of a Zoom fatigue, and a bit, of video fatigue, and are preferring shorter meetings. And sometimes they're finding that audio is just, works just as well. Now, we also asked people, SHRM asked people, where were they working from? Again, the best place to work from is a home office. And I was rather surprised to see 52% of the respondents actually had a home office. So I think that says a lot. Let's think, if this survey were conducted, 10 years ago, a lot of people would not have a home office, but it is becoming more prevalent, at least amongst people who are working from home. 34% are working off of a dining table, which means that that's the only surface they probably have in their home. And if they have children in the house, you can imagine that that might be a space that's being shared, and there might be many people there, and at mealtime, it might be difficult to keep work and home separate. And then others are responding, couch, bed. Those are not ideal places to work from, and we'll talk about it, because you want to be in a position which is ergonomic and safe. By the way, basements, I've seen a lot of people work out of their basements, garages. Sometimes people, when they're showing themselves, they can create a glare in their background. But I've seen people, take that off, and I see bicycles, so it's a bicycle hanging, so it's obviously they're in their garage, or you can see sometimes that they're in the basement. So people are trying to find any space they can to get away. Now, when SHRM, it was a CNBC survey, asked people, what are you doing with the time spent not commuting? As you can see from this survey, people are spending more time with family, 47%, and, getting a little bit more time to relax and sleep, and, obviously entertainment and hobbies, but also 28% are working more. In fact, all the data that I had seen prior to COVID, working at home more was usually the most popular response. And I think right now, for some people, it might be difficult to work more, but typically teleworkers do work more when they work at home. And I'm sure some of the relaxing and sleeping is because they're not spending time in the commute in the Metro Atlanta region. Korn Ferry is another, recruiting group, and they showed that of a survey of 783 professionals, that a lot of people are finding it hard to concentrate. And those top distractions, and I really want to draw your attention to these, are watching news about the pandemic, worrying about friends and family, worrying about the virus, and trying to work from home with kids present. One of the top suggestions I hope that everybody makes to their teleworkers is, please stay away from the TV and radio while you're working, because those can be huge distractions now. And, sometimes people have a hard time breaking away from it, and it does cause more stress and depression. Now, one of the questions that the CNBC survey asked was, once the economy reopens in whatever form, what would you like to do? And obviously, this question was asked of the people who were working at home, and I was kind of surprised to see that 55% want to return to the office. And, my gut tells me that a lot of that is because people want to have, go back to a normal situation. However, as we all know, we don't even know what, social distancing will look like as we move on in the next few months. Now, 24% would like to stay at home entirely or work more from home, and 20% were unsure. I really would suggest that in order to make the behavior of teleworking stick a little bit longer, or even on a permanent basis, we need to do something with this 50% to make it easier for them to be able to work at home. Because otherwise, we'll see traffic come back and the blue skies disappear. And before we know it, the commute will be right back to where we had started. But I do certainly believe wanting to return to the office is a desire for people to go back to, what their lives were previous to the pandemic. One of the other highlights on this CNBC survey that I wanted to point out is that employees are reporting, and it's 60% of them, are telling us that they're being just as productive or even more productive than before while they're working from home. And I think this is really notable in the light of all the distractions that people are having at home. So from a productivity standpoint, I think we're looking pretty strong in terms of, how effective people are being while they're working at home. And I bet you the rest of the people are probably unsure. When we've broken down some of the surveys that we have done on, how people felt about productivity, the numbers are very low in terms of the number of people who thought it had decreased, but that is in the case of companies that have planned for this change and have taken the time to develop guidelines, policies, and evaluations, and have worked with managers to manage by objectives, and the teleworkers have been trained. And that will be a topic of that I will be addressing in the rest of this presentation soon. Now, this is another survey, and I just want to, go back to showing how, what are people's concerns while they are working at home. Again, this is an extreme teleworking type of a situation. This was done by the Harris Poll on behalf of Glassdoor, who's another recruiting company. And obviously, the number one distraction is that the television. And, as I said, we really have to get people to unplug while they're working from TV, from the news, and the time that they're spending working, they should not be, constantly watching what the latest news is. Because as we know, the news is, pretty similar. Numbers, they go here and there. But when people are working, they should really create a space around themselves that lends itself to productivity. As far as some other concerns, the next highest was the 27%, because these are people with children under the age of 18 at home, and obviously they are concerned about the difficulty of managing children under the same roof. 25% said that their concern was missing out on interacting as parents, when they're working at home, as compared to other employees who don't have children. And then finally, obviously some people are just going stir crazy, and they're feeling lonely. And I bet you a lot of those might fall into that category of 14% that live alone. And I don't want to overstress about all of this, but it's just good to remember that people are going through difficult times. Stress, nightmares, anger, all of those are natural emotions that we're going through. Weight loss, weight gain, being worried about their health, and anxiety and stress are all intertwined with this teleworking experience, which is not normal. Usually when we're teleworking, all we have to worry about is getting our work done. And so this is a very different situation. Now, the best direction to have in this environment is to allow for business continuity while this crisis is ongoing, but do our best job. The teleworking is getting implemented in a planned and thoughtful process. And what I mean by that is making sure that we give, some thought to, what are the parameters, what do employees need, how do we bring them along in this new culture, which allows for working at home. However, before I go there, I do want to make the case that not only is teleworking excellent for business continuity, which is what we're doing. So, next time there is an emergency, all of you or all of your organizations are going to be so much more ready to be able to go back to some productivity immediately. But the best thing about teleworking is that it does tie back to return on investment. And we've studied teleworking since the late 70s, and we've studied it to death. So there's always been a lot of data on teleworking in a normal context, as well as a lot of studies that are ongoing now. And just wanted to also let you know that the GCO team has been doing a lot of surveys on Atlanta employees and supervisors, managers, as well as some executives to document what's happening to this COVID experience. And that data is very Atlanta-centric and will be ready to be shared, I think, as of next week or after. So going back to case for productivity, a lot of studies have shown that productivity can improve in the range of 10 to 20% when people work at home because of the lack of distractions and being able to work at your own best best time. When your body wakes up, and you might be able to start a little later and a little later, or start sooner and sooner. There is a lot of room for more flexibility, again, because of that ability to start or end later. Up till 2 months ago, this was a great recruitment and retention tool. A lot of people just want to have flexibility, and they look to the full suite of flexibility that employers offer when they consider jobs. And as we know, this is really very high up, especially with the millennials and X's, Y's, and Z's, as they are also in the workplace. And I think that the recruitment and retention angle will probably be an ongoing one. A lot of organizations are also, talking about, how this remote experience is opening up their ability from recruit from a lot more states and communities than what might be in their immediate community. Morale, teleworkers tell us it's the day that They're going to telework as their best day of their week. The day before, in anticipation of that, is their second best day. And the day they come back, they're still in a good mood. So there's 3 good days as a result of 1 day of teleworking. The overhead savings are starting to really appear as we're dealing with what COVID has caused, and some companies are starting to realize, so there are some jobs that we thought were essential or had to be done in the office, but maybe there's more flexibility on that because it's being done, so just as well. And I think a lot of managers are getting the experience of how to manage people who are remote. So it's not uncommon. I can just give you one example of a company I'm working with in the Northwest. I work nationally, and they are going to go from 3 whole floors to possibly 2 floors, immediately getting rid of 1 entire floor of overhead. That is because of the ability to have people work remotely. And by the way, overhead also includes parking, so it can dramatically help save on parking costs. We also know how stressful the commute can be, especially we know the commute in Atlanta. We never know when it's going to happen, when it's going to end, and one little accident, and everything kind of gets just held back. So very essential to this process is transitioning from managing my presence and going towards an organization that really manages objectives and deliverables. So this should be an environment where managers and employees easily share goals. Managers easily provide directions. The deliverables are clear, the time frames are clear, the quality, the quantity. There's training, there's feedback. A lot of organizations are telling us, they don't wait a whole year to do an evaluation or 6 months. And that is part and parcel of the work week every week. So this is really essential to teleworking. And I know this chart is old, it's from 2014, but it even shows in 2014, SHRM did this survey and they were asking managers, how do you measure productivity when people are remote? The most popular response was 48%, and again, multiple responses were allowed, was how quickly people responded to communication, emails, return phone calls, etc. So communication is one of the big indicators of productivity. And obviously setting parameters, and making sure that we have good standards for measuring productivity both on-site and off-site. The question often is, people go home and all of a sudden we're like, how productive are you? Well, we should have those same measures when people were working in the office. So it's good to think back and see how we knew the work was getting done. Now, very important on this list is 9% of the managers only picked monitoring employees via software in terms of when they turned on and when they logged off. I'm starting to see some disturbing articles come on about how some employers are thinking about using webcams to see if employees are working remotely. Webcams are for collaboration. They're not for monitoring. And that will provide, a real big brother watching type of an environment, which nobody would be comfortable, conducting their work in. And besides, if a manager has to watch when everybody logged on and logged off, would that be a productive use of their time? I would hope to believe not. Are contracts, policies, and guidelines necessary? Yes. We strongly believe going forward, if you do not have parameters, and a lot of you may not, that you should have some guidelines, in place that show basically, what are the rules of your organization? How are you protecting the employer, how are you protecting the employees, and by having objective rules about selection, about jobs being appropriate, employees being appropriate, what the technology looks like, you're able to accommodate a lot more employees as opposed to one or two who may be doing it. We also don't want you to fall into legal pitfalls. We highly recommend you talk to your attorneys when you're after we've helped you work on those policies, or we've helped you put them together. Again, remember, our assistance comes at no cost to you. And I will go over what those are. None of them are a showstopper. You want to be transparent because, teleworking requires honesty and transparency. Because if we're not together all the time, everything should be very clear. And we also want to make sure that these guidelines help you as you open up in whatever shape or form it is. Is there a correlation between the size of employer and having a policy or guideline? Yes. Pre-COVID, this is 2017 data. As you can see, the smaller the employer was, the less likely they were to provide some guideline. However, 42% of the employers were providing some guidelines. 60% were not. Based on what the employees said. So we really want to move, I would say the needle on the 60% who don't have rules and procedures and training, so that if larger numbers than ever before continue teleworking, that you have a solid program. Legalities to consider, obviously wage and hour laws. If you have non-exempts, you want to have a way to record the number of hours that have been worked, because that's a requirement of FLSA, and as well as not going over 40 hours of work a week without following the guidelines of your overtime policies, which is typically you talk to your manager. OSHA is important. You do want to give your employees some safety precautions, because when they work at home and they're in their designated workspace, during the work-related hours, workers' comp can apply. But if they go to the kitchen and cut their hand, obviously that would not be applicable. However, OSHA does not require you to do home office inspections, but employers usually reserve the right in a policy to do that. ADA and FMLA do not say that teleworking has to be an accommodation, but in some cases it may be a good accommodation, and it's not usually discussed on the telework side. You also want to be very careful about the language you're using so it's not discriminatory. Don't call teleworking a privilege, a perk, an entitlement, because you're going to create haves and have-nots. Always remember that part of your organization may never be able to telework. Some of them are essential workers. And so your language has to be clear. And as I mentioned before, have these been a showstopper? Absolutely not. There's so many companies, large companies, small companies that are teleworking. You just have to be cognizant of these, and please do talk to your attorneys. I am not an attorney, but I do want to make you aware of these issues. So what's included in a policy? Again, we have templates. We can work with you. We have quick guides. For larger employers, we really highly do recommend doing a little bit more crafting on your policies and taking advantage of our resources at the GCO or through your transportation management associations. Obviously, goals. If the goal is business continuity and only business continuity, then do have that so you manage expectations. If your organization wants everyone to go back, then they should know there is going to be an end to this. You want to have selection criteria. You want to, talk about scheduling, how often this can be available. and some of the legalities, the technology, the limitations of the technology, who provides the equipment, who insures the equipment, the workspace necessities, and the non-teleworkers. I've shown this slide before in some of our webinars, and I do apologize that some of these slides are a repeat, but we never know who we're getting. However, the business of being serious about teleworking is important. This is something that can be filled out between a manager and an employee about the telework arrangement. We highly recommend you use these. These are also available on our website, and we'll be showing our website again at the end. But they do tailor the use of teleworking to the employees. And actually, we'd like to do a polling question now, and just wondering, what are your plans after travel restriction is lifted, in the region? So the choices are you going to have more employees teleworking, less? You're going to develop a policy, introduce training? Are you going to equip people? None, unsure, and multiple responses are allowed. So please do share with us what your plans are. Okay, let's go ahead and show those. As we're waiting for the polls to show up, I see a question. Is a copy of this presentation available so you can share with colleagues? There will be a recording that we will have on our website, and yes, that can be shared. So let's look at the results. Well, I think a lot of you are showing that more employees are going to telework, some less. I'm glad that some of you are thinking about policy development, training. 20% are looking at equipping people. And some of you are unsure, and we understand that because it's very difficult because there's a lot that we don't know in this environment. Okay, so I'm going to skip over this in the interest of time because I really do want to give Kevin sufficient time to talk. I also do want to point out that flexibility has always been part and parcel of offering flexible schedules. And as you see here, again, 2017 data, but the correlation between younger people and how flexibility impacts them. In fact, I'm more likely to leave my employer in the next 12 months because they lack certain arrangements. As you can see, for a lot of younger people, it's very important. And I think when we look at the other end of the spectrum, obviously to baby boomers, it doesn't show to be as important. However, I think that people are reconsidering when they, when they're going to retire now. And for some, they may want to stay in the workforce longer. And it would be a pity to, lose some of that expertise. Okay, so this is just, I just want to point out a few other things that the surveys are showing us. Yes, we're seeing some comments come up about security being important and infrastructure being very important in this context. You're absolutely right. I do want to just hit some high points and about this is a survey by Glassdoor that I talked about before. Close to 70% of employees are supportive of their employer's decision to allow them to work at home in this time. And 60% were confident that they could do their job efficiently. And 50% said that they were as productive, they were hoping to be as productive or equally productive. So this issue of productivity is really good. When we think about it, and the confidence in terms of working remotely was a lot higher for employees that were in the age group of 18 to 34 as opposed to those in, again, the older age groups, which is 55 to 64, we're at 44% were as confident. Men were a little bit more confident about their ability to do their jobs remotely compared, to females. But look at actually, when you think about the fact that 75% of people didn't even think it was, important, I think it stands out loudly, and confidence with parents, was an issue. Again, the top distractions that keep coming up, survey after survey: TV, concern about human interaction, at-home child, care, and lack of social interaction. So just very few tips for teleworkers: be organized, be accessible, make sure your schedules are updated. Some tips for teleworkers, we covered these last week in another recording, but we really do need to bring some organization to teleworkers working at home. Have rituals, have middle of the day breaks, do move around, and have a dedicated workspace at home. If they don't have one now, it's good going forward if they think about it. Ergonomically, we want them to think of surface space, not glass. A good chair. Some people are investing in a chair. Appropriate lighting. Read at eye level. Safety, worth a fire extinguisher, where the exits, but also make sure your cables are laid out in a safe manner. And although noise is not about ergonomics, but I think we've all noticed that we can hear kids right now in the background. We hear pets. Under normal teleworking, this was not acceptable. So, but during this, everybody being under the same roof, I think we've all, made changes. And sometimes actually it's been bringing coworkers closer, as they can show their children, their pets, their spouses. Okay. The message to everyone: I'm home, but I'm working. Have rules for the equipment you bring home from the office, you have brought home. Again, it's only for your use and not other family members. Few things that you should be tracking right now are, I think, productivity based on different jobs and employees, to see who's doing well during this, this crisis. Definitely documenting technology problems and solutions, having those brown bag lunches as a virtual meeting where people talk about issues that came up and solutions, because the best platform is for employees to share, how they resolve the issues, and, of course, having, if it's IT involved, and documenting all the lessons learned. So a few, things that I want to leave you with. You need to start planning now. We don't know how long this situation will go on. And I think we do need to think about how space will be allocated as we transition back to the office. Some people may have to go in and there might have to be social distancing, so they may not be as room for others. Manage expectations. Definitely make sure your IT platform is solid, secure, and robust. You might have to integrate more virtual collaboration. And by the way, yes, having a water cooler, which is virtual, lunches that are virtual, or pet exchange, or exchange of recipes, those all break down that isolation. Not everybody may want to continue. Some people may just not like being alone. But through this pandemic, both employees and managers have probably gotten stronger at being remote. So going forward, please do consider also, alternative work hours, shift differentials, a group A and a B. A comes in the office 1 week, the office gets cleansed while group B is working at home, and then vice versa the other week. And think about some clever ways that space can be shared in the office to allow for health and safety. So at this point, Kevin, I would love to ask you to share a little bit about your experiences. And we've had the pleasure of working with Kevin for a number of years now. Kevin, tell us a little bit about your organization. You know, how many employees, how many are teleworking, you know, your workspace to begin with.
Okay, thank you. Oh, Ham, it's good to, great presentation. The Georgia Baptist Mission Board is 198 years old as a corporation, and we work with 3,600 Georgia Baptist churches in Georgia. And we have about 136 full-time employees. Out of that, 65 of our employees are currently housed in what we call our administrative building. And then we have about 57 or so that are working in 6 different regions in Georgia, that we have divided up the state in 6 regions, and they're working and teleworking all the time. Majority of our 65 that are in our administration building, there's probably a group about 25 that are non-exempt employees. That's very important when we were working on teleworking. How do we do this with non-exempt, recording their time and all of that? So we have just recently transitioned to this type of setup with regions and administration building over the past 18 months. So that's kind of a bit of what we do. Our staff does travel. The ones in regions, they'll travel about 1 million miles this year in the state of Georgia.
So Kevin, you started with some teleworking in place when we initially met, and then tell us how that changed.
Okay.
Please, yeah. Yes.
When we first started working with Georgia Commute, we were considering working 1 day a week on Fridays from home. And we knew that we had a lot to do to get everybody ready for this. And when we first announced it, there was some angst, I guess you could say, of some of our employees. Well, how am I going to get my work done in 4 days? So we began training them. Here's how you plan to take work home with you and how you can work from Fridays. So at that point, Najib, we became friends in a meeting that is in our local area, and he's telling me what he did, and he came over and shared with what Georgia Commute does. And from there, we started the process to build out policies and procedures and slowly work for probably a year and a half working from home on Fridays. So that was basically the beginning of the process. So.
Kevin, I know that you have a policy. What are some highlights of your policy? Just a few, if you could mention.
I think some of the highlights was that there was a document of the do's and don'ts for both the teleworker and the telemanager. And that was very helpful, especially for our managers to understand what they should and should not do, or how to do things, how to communicate, how to keep people involved. And the same way with the teleworkers, how do you communicate across our organization? If you're working on a group project, how do you do those type things? So probably the do's and don'ts document was the most helpful for a lot of folks.
What technology are you using for teleworking?
We are currently and plan to be with, we just moved completely over 2 years ago to Office 365. I think it's changing names to Microsoft 365, and use Teams now as basically our main phone system. And so we're slowly migrating all the employees to that. Before we started working on telecommuting and with Georgia Commute, a lot of departments would use different things outside of the Microsoft world, Google, different things. So we've been bringing everybody in under the Microsoft umbrella and the platform to do that.
Great. Do you want to share with us what were some of the pitfalls or hard lessons, pain points?
Well, some of the pitfalls is the actual use of Office 365. A lot of people just did not understand a lot about what it could do. So through training, we were able to do that, and Georgia Commute did help us with some of that training early on. And also, you know, as they began training with our employees, teleworking, and also when they were in the building and different things, they necessarily didn't buy into this training because they thought they understood pretty well what they needed to do to get their job done. Now, when COVID hit and everybody had to work from home, basically our IT team tripled their training over these weeks and offered many courses, repeat courses, and newer courses as they go along. And it was amazing how many people now were interested in taking the training, and you can see some results of the productivity with that. Some of the other pitfalls that we faced is, and I think a lot of companies have gone through this, is the amount of phishing emails. And we had started last year to train our employees on phishing emails, and we have a company that provides tests for our employees. And so we, on a regular basis, about once a quarter, this company will send out emails with intent of phishing an employee. And when they do click through, then obviously we get a record. And then we ask those employees to go through some additional training on how you read your emails and look for things like that. And I must admit, in this process, the last phishing test was 3 weeks ago. And the person that runs the company, I think he sent me a curveball, and I failed the test. He had masked an email very similar to one of my vendors that I use. So I have to go back through the training as well as COO. So,
Oh my God.
That's the pitfalls you have is during this time, people see that you could be weak in your organization with your IT structure. Mm-hmm. And so standardizing everything, firewalls, even your disaster recovery plan for your system, for your company. We saw the COVID as a test of that to make sure everything's working. So.
Great, Kevin, it's been a pleasure to work with you. So what are your plans going forward?
Well, our plans going forward is we're evaluating if we're going to open up teleworking more than just 1 day a week. You know, we're looking at 2 days or 3 days or some type. Also, you know, going forward is continue to train. We're moving some of our training focus over to peer-to-peer training. So some of our people that have caught on to all the office products have become very proficient in them, we're letting those train their peers. And we're seeing a great response to that, and which is creating some excitement in some ways. And also going forward and lesson learned and everything is, again, we meet with our IT department quite a bit on a weekly basis to try to look for things that could hinder our employees from teleworking and work on those things as well. I like to keep my IT department very close as we're going through this process. So we see that in the last 6 to 8 weeks, our productivity has gone up, especially from our field staff where they have deliverables to pastors and churches. And pastors have all ministers of all denominations. They carry a huge load with their parishioners and their members. And so we have been able to use telework through Zoom and Teams and all that to have face-to-face calls with them, to encourage them, to equip them. And so going forward, we just keep building onto that.
Kevin, thank you so much for sharing your experiences. Dan, I'm going to give it back to you.
Thanks. And thanks again, Kevin. I think as you were going over some of those successes, lessons learned, as well as, you know, some of the pitfalls, I think it's important to call out that for the last couple of weeks, as an organization, GCO, we did a survey with a lot of our employers. It was pushed out through different CIDs and chambers. And so that survey has since wrapped up, but we got over thousands of responses. And I think it's going to be really helpful for one, to hear you, Kevin, speak on in what your experiences were at Georgia Baptist, because that's one of the things that we're seeing in the initial responses from the surveys, is that it would be helpful for different employers who really are at the front lines with trying to implement these telework programs, for them to hear what other peers are going through and what other employers are doing and trying and going through. So this was great information, and I really appreciate it. As we wrap up here, before we get into the question and answer portion, I wanted to make sure everyone was aware of the following resources that are available on the Georgia Queuing Options website. There you will able to, you'll find all the recordings that we've done so far in our 2 telework webinar series. We actually had a question come up on the chat in terms of when is this recording going to be posted on the website, and it usually takes about a day. We'll get the recording comes in from Zoom this evening, and then we'll get it posted at some point tomorrow by the afternoon. So I want to make sure everyone's aware of that, as well as Kevin mentioned before, one of the things that he found helpful was the teleworker do's and don'ts for both the teleworker and the manager. And that's something that you'll be able to find in our Telework Quick Start Guide that we created a couple months ago, right as the pandemic started to ramp up. And so you'll be able to download that PDF, and it's got other hyperlinks to some of those additional resources. So I want to make sure that I called out that. And then finally, there's also some information for CDC's guidance for businesses for some of you employers out there who may have some employees heading back to the office in the coming weeks. And finally, there is a QR code on the slide. If you could just please take a couple minutes, it's really easy. If you just pull up the camera on your cell phone, it'll take you right to our survey. And again, it just takes a couple minutes, and it's really helpful for us to get that information for how helpful this information was and anything we can improve. And with that, I will now open it up to question and answer. We just had a question come in. Are there employers providing technology to their employees who work at home? Who pays for the broadband? Elham, can you start us off with that?
Sure. I can tell you that in the whole world of telework prior to COVID, some employers provided employees with laptops every time they had to, upgrade their desktop. And that made it easier for those employees to go remote. And some employers also allowed for employees to use their own equipment. We're starting to see a lot more employers provide equipment, and the cost of broadband is usually picked up by the employee. Again, there are employee savings to this. You're not commuting. So, so hopefully that is really helping your bottom line. And a lot of people do see a significant impact, on both time and costs of commuting. But broadband has been, one of those that I haven't seen much change yet. And some employers are thinking of offering stipends, so the employee could apply it any way they want. But these are kind of newer changes.
Thanks, Elham. We've had a couple come in here. One question that came in through chat was, again, how to use the QR code. So if you pull up the camera feature on your phone and you just cover or point it at the QR code, it automatically will give you usually a pop-up box where you can go into the internet section. It'll take you to the survey. Additionally, as you wrap up and close up the Zoom software app, we also have an automatic link that will take you there as well. So I just want to call that out. The next question we have here is, how should we be dealing with employees who feel isolated or stressed?
And Kevin, by the way, you can feel free to chime in on this one too. I'll give I'll give an answer. And that is, I think that we do want to make sure employees have good guidelines. They have a ritual that they start with in the morning, so that they know when they're going to start work. They should get dressed, but not dressed up. So please change out of your pajamas. We want to make sure that people have, some of that virtual break or virtual meeting time just to talk about family issues, social issues, the type of stuff we used to do in the office when we would run into someone in the kitchen or by the water cooler. I think telling people not to watch TV while they're working is gonna, as simple as it sounds, is very important. Very, very essential is also to make sure people have an end of the workday, because otherwise there are some people who turn to burnout and they keep working, and that in and of itself can be a cause of depression. I don't know, Kevin, did you want to add to that?
Yes, Elham. And when everybody started coming back, we were just kind of talking to people, see how things went. And I found out that there was couple different groups that normally eat lunch together in our employee break room. What they did is they did the same thing, but through Teams. They would set their phone up in their dining room table or wherever out on the porch or their laptop, and they would sit there with Teams going on as a meeting, but it was a lunch meeting, not necessarily work meeting. They were just eating lunch together over the computer. And I thought, well, that's pretty neat. And then it dawned on me that one of the weekends that we could not see our grandchildren, which was Easter because of COVID, we did a FaceTime lunch, set our computer up in front of us, my wife and I, as we eat our lunch and they eat their Easter lunch, and we saw each other and talk back and forth. So as you mentioned, a lot of those fellowships that you could do in a building, you could do by video and just schedule them like a regular 15-minute break, morning and afternoon, or do your lunch period. That's a great way to do it.
Oh, that's a great idea. Great idea.
So we're going a little bit over time here, but we do have one quick question maybe that you can cover a little bit in terms of, Elham, do you know, in terms of legal definition of essential workers, have you seen that anywhere? Do you know if it's dependent by state, or is that?
Exactly.
Okay.
It's, states can designate what qualifies as essential. A standard definition is an essential employee is someone who performs work involving the safety of human life and the protection of property. And there is an act, it's called the Essential Services Act of 2013. However, keep in mind, everybody would argue that they're essential to their employers, but, lawmakers have dwindled down that list to, certain industries as to what qualifies as essential.
We did have another question pop up from Audrey. How are organizations adapting and handling children being home now? It's a serious issue for both parents and kids of all ages. It doesn't seem to be something that will be going away anytime soon. So I know, Elham, that's something that you're definitely aware of. I don't know if Kevin, you want to talk about that for how Georgia Baptist is having that conversation, but is that something you want to talk about, Elham?
I'll just be very brief. I think, as I said, we have to create a space around ourselves while we're working. And that is done, by just sharing with your family, I have to work, this is how I pay the bills. I would appreciate it. Educate them. I educated my daughter since she was very young, at the age of, from the age of 3 and 4, if the office door was closed, but I had childcare in place, of course, at home at the time, not to just open the door and jump in. As she started reading and writing, I actually encouraged her to put notes under the door when she wanted to interrupt me. So it all goes back, to training. And eventually it got to texting as she learned how to text. But, it's training, it's educating. Sometimes it's just really hard. I am looking into some new modules that are coming out about training, teleworking with children at home. And hopefully we can share those very quickly through the GCO. Kevin, want to add to that?
I think that's a great answer, the training. Also, just setting your children down and let them understand what you do and why you do your work that you do. and they'll understand the importance of you need some time alone just to take care of that work. And I think their curiosity most of the time will kick in and just keep asking questions as you keep working, and they begin to respect it. You know, respect your time when you say, I've got to go to work, I'm going to go up in my office and shut the door. But I think it's all involves around training, and it could take a while to do that. But two, I think employers during this time, especially the way we've kind of been pushed to this, they will understand to a certain amount, and, you know, but just keep training them.
And I think there's a question about toddlers coming up. It's really hard to train toddlers with this. So sometimes maybe engaging them, you know, in sitting down and painting and writing with you, but it's very hard. My heart goes out to parents with small kids. And when I talk to teleworkers, I do feel the frustration and the stress that they have, especially if they're a single parent. Yes, it's very, very difficult. And that's why I want us all to be mindful of, you know, how the teleworkers are operating and what, you know, are some of the circumstances around them. We need to be very understanding in this period.
Thank you, Ilham. And just as I mentioned before, I think that with the thousands of responses that we got from the survey that we did within GCO and partner with our TMA partners, I think it's going to be great for everyone to see that not only is this information being shared regionally from the data that Ilham shared before with CNBC and through SHRM, that parents who do have toddlers or do have children that they need to, you know, and are having that difficulty having that work and life balance, that it's going to even be more realistic when they see that the employers here in Atlanta are having those same issues. And it's going to be something that we all have to try to figure out moving forward. So again, I really want to thank both Kevin and Ilham. It was really helpful to have you both share this information, and hopefully it was helpful for those who've attended as well. Thanks for all of you who attended. I hope you all have a great week. Take care.